Hello and welcome to this PRCA lunchtime event. I'm Tom Watt, Deputy Chair of PRCA Scotland, and today we're discussing out of office 1 year on, exactly 1 year on. It's obviously been an incredibly difficult year for so many reasons. We're fortunate to have our jobs and our health. One of the reasons this has been so tough this last year is everybody knows someone who doesn't have those things. So this is not a discussion today of how we look on the bright side of an incredibly trying year. It's a look at how things have changed for the PR and comms industry and how we've continued to operate from home at what's just really a symbolic point. We do have an incredible panel of guests today, though, who are bringing a whole range of experience to share today. Joining me, first of all, Melissa Rinn, Digital Innovation and Insights Manager at John Doe. She's an award-winning creative marketing strategist. She's worked on some of the most eye-catching and innovative agency campaigns you will definitely have seen across media in the last few years. Duncan Mackay, Senior Public Affairs and Communications Officer with University Scotland. He brings over a decade of experience in both agency public affairs and PR and leading media work for the representative body of Scotland's 19 higher education institutions. And Stuart Wilson, Group Director of Comms for CalMac. He's headed up comms and crisis strategies across public, private and third sector organisations for over 21 years, including Strathclyde Police, Inverclyde Council, NHS Lothian, Mears Group and now Caledonian MacBrayne. So welcome everyone and thank you all so much for joining me today. Start with you, Melissa.
Hey.
rewind to a year ago. Lockdown is announced. Were you prepared?
Well, not as much as I thought we were. For a start, we'll probably get onto this in a bit, but my agency that I work for, John Doe, was not called John Doe. So that's something interesting. We've ended up changing names throughout the last year. But we'd always worked from home. We'd always had a very open door policy. You can work from home whenever you like. As you can probably tell, I'm not originally from Scotland, so I often used to head back down south to see my family, work from Essex for a week or two. Just admitted I'm from Essex, which I just had to mumble over there. So we were quite used to working from home in principle, but I don't think we were prepared for how long we'd be working from home. And I don't know whether any of you have encountered the same, but it was simple things that are fine on a short-term basis, but things like our remote server, which is set up, so it's ultra secure, ultra tight, but actually where we used to store work on there, we used to have a central hub where everyone could access everything. To this day, we still haven't really gotten over the storage situation in terms of how we have a communal area where everything is stored. So we were prepared, we were used to it, we thought we were completely ready. We actually started working from home a week earlier to test everything because we kind of had, as we all did, a little bit of rumblings of what was happening. But I still don't think we were prepared enough in terms of that long-term situation that we're all in and that we're all finding ourselves in. Really interesting. I deliberately looked this up just before I came on. I didn't get my office chair, for example, from the office until about August time. And apparently that's when everyone else did as well, because it was something like there was 178% in search interest in office chairs in August 2020 from the previous year. So I think we were all kind of prepared for a short-term break, something that was a little bit different, but I don't necessarily think any of us envisioned being here a year later, still in our spare bedrooms with the washing drying next to us.
What about yourself, Stuart? I mean, how did you guys prepare? How easily could you switch to remote working?
It was interesting because we weren't prepared at all, quite frankly. I'd just recently started at CalMac and had put in place a restructure of the team that meant when lockdown happened, I was on my own and was pending the appointment of 3 new roles within the team. And of course, that was all paused. So I ended up doing all external, internal stakeholder communication on my own. So it was very ill prepared at that point, to be perfectly honest, but I was surprised at how quickly the technology in the organisation was able to adapt to it. We always joked that if we'd sat down and planned through a series of committee meetings how we could get the entire office-based workforce to work from home, we'd probably still be sitting just now trying to come to the finer points of that. But actually, when we sent out an email and phoned round and said, right, everybody go home, and we'll just pick it up from there, I was really surprised at how quickly people adapted to that and the technology adapted to it as well.
And yourself, Duncan, I mean, lockdown came at a pivotal time for universities.
Yeah, it did. And I would say that as an organisation, in all honesty, we probably were not prepared in the same way that I think most of society wasn't. I think, as Melissa referenced, we were, fine in principle. We had a pretty relaxed, you can work at home sort of policy, but it wasn't necessarily formalised in the way that we've had to be now. And it wasn't thinking about this being in place for a whole year. We were really fortunate that our IT rollout, laptops got delivered, things like that, new chairs and stuff like that. It was a quick win, I think, for everyone to be assured that they were being supported at home, which I think was a big thing, because again, I think most of us thought it was going to be maybe a novelty. That novelty has obviously worn off greatly since then. But yeah, I think we moved really quickly. I think we did it probably about a year and a week ago, because we had staff members going into voluntary self-isolation, things like that. But it was it was remarkable how quickly it was done. But so I think that was really reassuring that organisations can move fast when needs must.
If we could come back to you, Stuart, for a second, what have been the biggest challenges, the greatest professional challenges? I mean, maybe sector specific to you, and how have you overcome them?
I mean, sector specific for us was that as an organisation, we couldn't stop. So the service that we were offering wasn't something that stopped as a result of this. In fact, it became even more important. We provide, as you probably know, a lifeline ferry service to the Western Isles of Scotland and the Clyde, etc. So for us, the test was, how do we maintain the support service around all of that, while the guys and gals out on the vessels and in the ports still have to come in and do their job as normal? How do we get that support in behind them? And that was really tough. And I know even now, we can talk about this later, the team meetings that we have across the board, but they found that tough when we were all disappearing home and putting the slippers on, and they were still providing the service that they had to, and felt as if they'd lost a bit of backup at that point. So sector specific for us, it was difficult, and particularly internal communications, because a lot of the people we have, of course, the majority of our workforce are on vessels or in ports, so they're not sitting at a computer, they're not accessing email. There's a real kind of cascade team brief type situation that we have to use, and that was the biggest challenge, was to ensure that they were getting the messages that they needed to hear at a time when they needed to hear them.
And how did you tackle that?
So we did a number of things. The first thing we did was we put in place a text message service. So we harvested, basically if you had a work mobile phone, you didn't have a choice, you automatically get put onto the system. But we harvested people using GDPR compliance with their personal mobile phones, and then we set up an external website for staff that staff would access. So anytime there was a COVID update, we would send a text message to a series of phones, and about 80% of people signed up for that service. So that was a good coverage for us. And anytime there was an important update, we would send a text message to your phone, and when you clicked on that message, it took you direct to not an intranet, but actually an external website, as I say, set up for staff, where we were giving them all the latest news, latest information, frequently asked questions, and even uploading videos from directors. And we tried to get a different director throughout to ensure that we were covering HR issues, finance issues, general issues, safety, etc.
And the same question to you, Duncan. I mean, what's been the greatest challenge that University of Scotland's faced? I mean, I'm sure there will be a number of them.
Yeah, I think on a sector level for our members, I think the difficulty was that there was the idea that that universities closed, and I think that was quite difficult to combat early on. By virtue of the fact that you've seen that we are now getting vaccinated and things like that, shows that the research carried on. But yes, the teaching stopped. But there was a kind of messaging that needed to be drawn around the fact that for a lot of university staff, it was still business as usual, but in safer environments. And then also that not all of our students could go home. Some of them don't have homes to return to. So there was things around that had to be managed, as you would imagine, with a diverse, almost 250,000 students in Scotland. And so, and I think the biggest challenge on one level is that it's a pandemic, and to use the dreaded word that I think we've heard probably more often than not during any of these discussions, is that it is unprecedented. There was no, we've all done the kind of the crisis comms training courses and things like that, but there was no guide. Those are for, can be for quite small isolated incidents. This is for a pandemic that has impacted all walks of life, and so everyone's doing the best they can, but we were at the mercy of governments and things that are happening across the world. And I know that's not really a comfortable place for comms colleagues to be, because that we like to be in charge and we like to know what's going on. But I think there was an element of accepting that mistakes would happen as well, and focusing on the process that led to those mistakes being made, but then rectifying them for the future. And then I suppose on a semi-personal note, but in terms of how it impacted our team internally, you just miss picking things up around the office. I think I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that most comms people are well, we'll say on a nice term, curious, on another way nosy, and we pick things up around the office, and chats in the kitchen, or overhearing conversations, or heated phone calls, or what like. And so just that organic flow of information just hasn't existed when you're sitting in your spare room or on your bed or what have you. And so you've got to, what we've tried to do is formalize or systemize, put in kind of that scaffolding in place that allows us to still be hearing information from colleagues and from other people within the sector.
And from an agency perspective, Melissa, how there's a unique set of challenges there, because you're not internal in the first place. You're at the mercy of what information you're given. How have you dealt with, what have been the biggest challenges from you, and how have you kind of set out to overcome those?
I think it's exactly that in terms of the level of information that you need to receive to be able to do your job. I don't know whether any of you have Cortana set up or My Analytics on your Outlook if you use Outlook, but I've only started using it recently. And I got an email, I think it was yesterday, I was about to say on Monday, that was yesterday, wasn't it? That said, in the last 28 days, I'd received 4,500 emails, and I'd sent something like 450 or something, but I was like, let's look in the data of that. I broke it down. Say if you had 20 working days in that 28-day period, that'd be 225 emails a day. And say if you decided to spend 2 minutes just reading, digesting, not even replying to each one, that's 7.5 hours each day. Then you combine with that, I then had a look at the amount of meetings I had. And it said I had on average 7.8 meetings a day. So it was 156 meetings during this period. And then I looked again, if each one was 30 minutes, it would be roughly 4 hours of meetings per day. So already, before you even started your work, your day, just in terms of getting information, is already taken over. And I think from an agency perspective, I know that's one of the things that I found the hardest, because obviously when you're dealing with your client, obviously you're dealing with your own time pressures as well. And a lot of the time a client will come to us with something fairly urgent, and it's this constant adapting in terms of working out what's the main priority. It almost feels like continual firefighting occasionally, or it did in the start, until you start to get proper processes in place and you start to really manage your resource a lot better, I think. I'd be quite intrigued to see whether we keep up this level of meetings that we've all got used to and accustomed to in emails. But I think the hardest thing from a general agency perspective, I would definitely say, is time, making sure that you have the time for your clients when they need it as well, which is a lot more tricky than it used to be.
Yeah, there's definitely what used to be overhearing a conversation or a snippet of a 30-second conversation now is a half-hour meeting by necessity. Duncan, if we can come back to you, I mean, so much of the comms industry in general is about creativity, collaboration, and even just staying motivated when your Friday is the same as your Sunday is the same as your Tuesday. How have you, either personally or as an organization, met those challenges?
I think, truthfully, some of the time, I don't think I have. I think I'll put my hand up and say it. I think that that's okay to say it. I think that everything has been in flux for the past year, and it's okay to acknowledge it. And I've with my team members, I've acknowledged that to them and expected in this, likewise, and coming back in terms of being like, some days it is just going to be a slog, and I think that that's okay to acknowledge it, because I think I saw someone on, I'd imagined on Twitter, said, we're not working from home, we're living in the office, and I think that we should kind of think about that a little bit more. And I've been tried to be slightly more lenient with people and around that, because it's not the same as being in office, but that's not to say that it's been completely flatline. I think that's the last year has fluctuated a lot, and I think that I've definitely found that I've been inspired by the sector a lot more. That it's given me renewed admiration and motivation to continue working in the sector. I mean, I think we've got some of the stuff that we've seen that our staff and students have done is amazing. In terms of not just related to the pandemic, but largely around that, accelerating training so students can go to be on the front line, to fight coronavirus. The involvement in research, the stuff they've done in the local community in terms of realizing that things there are gaps that need to be filled, and a university can do that. So that's kind of where I've tried to get my inspiration, and then also just the really basic thing, getting out the house and getting fresh air.
I mean, Melissa, from an agency point of view, I mean, in the last year, you've obviously you still had to remain creative, and that's what an agency's called for. But we're not in particularly creative circumstances. Where have you got your inspiration from for some of the campaigns you've been working on?
Do you know, a little bit like Duncan, we've set up all these like different ways of doing it. We've got I started doing the Couch to 5K, which actually, to be fair, it changed my mental health no end, because I think it's so easy to sit at your desk, and so I think simple things like getting out of the office, the house, whatever we call it nowadays, are so important. But something you said there, Duncan, really hit home in terms of being inspired by your sector. And I think actually what we found was a lot of the campaigns that we activated between probably from throughout the whole summer, actually probably from about June to about September, or things that we already had planned pre-pandemic, and actually what we had to do was pivot, really change them. But when you kind of think about what our jobs are as comms professionals, it's to communicate with humans, it's to understand how our brand or what we're selling can plug a gap or help someone feel slightly differently towards that brand. How can we support them? And I think actually one weird thing is, throughout all of this, we've never been more connected. There's never been more of a social consciousness. We've never understood each other more, because we're all in the same situation regardless. I mean, some of us are more privileged, some of us are less privileged, that's without doubt. But I think there's actually something really inspiring in a almost global mindset, in a sense. Wherever you are, there's something quite inspirational in it. And some of our campaigns that we've launched during this, to give you one example, we did a campaign for the Sunday Post newspaper, which we planned in January, long before any of this. And the tagline was "News Worth Waiting For," and it was all about how, obviously as a weekly Sunday paper, how do you compete with BBC News, where something's published straight away? How is that relevant? And what we realized was, you had information overload. Every 5 minutes, you've got a ping coming on your phone where there's a new bad thing that's happened. The BBC alert noise just always fills my heart with dread, because it's never normally anything good. So we started focusing on a campaign that was all around that. And then when the pandemic actually hit, we realized it was more important than ever. I deleted the BBC News app off my phone, as someone who is notoriously nosy as well and likes to be the first to know everything. It was quite a big step for me. So I think to kind of go really full circle back, I think there's loads of small things you need to do, like getting out of the house. But actually, I think there's something fascinating in us as a human collective, being more connected and there's more kind of insight and more knowledge that changes on a daily basis than we've ever had before. So actually, in our line of work, it's actually quite inspiring to have a different brief every single day, every single week. It's exhausting, but there's no 6 months of market research that you can really do that can communicate with someone on that plane. So yeah, it's tough, but it's actually, there's inspiration out there that's different every single day for us, I guess.
And Stuart, you mentioned some of the processes that you put in place, but you obviously you don't necessarily have the advantage that some of our colleagues have here, where everybody's working from home, as you mentioned, everyone's got immediate internet access. How have you kept the team together? How have you kept each other motivated? How have you stayed motivated? I mean, you said like this time last year, you were a one-man team. How was that? How did you get up in the morning and get through it?
Because I had so much work to do usually. No, what's been really interesting for me in all of this is that when I came into CalMac and I was brought in for a specific reason, and the reason was that they didn't really have a communications department, which I found incredible, but nevertheless that was the case. So they didn't have a comms department as such. Comms was not at the top table. And what this pandemic has done is actually it's shown the organisation the importance of comms, external, internal, stakeholder, etc. And now, you talk about meetings, it is kind of dawn to dusk stuff, because everybody wants a bite of communications at the moment. We have to communicate with our communities, we have to communicate with people who might be wanting to sail with us, we have to communicate with our staff, we have to communicate with politicians largely, and there's always a number of gripes and groans around what's happening. So for me, the opportunity of this is it's put communications in my organisation at the top table, and it never had a seat there before. And in terms of coping, I recruited a team through the pandemic using Zoom or Microsoft Teams as it was at that point. I would never have envisaged doing that before. Job interviews where quite a lot of the cues that you take that you don't write down but are kind of visual body language and that kind of stuff is somebody rolling their eyes or what they're doing with their feet and all this kind of thing that you look at in an interview. But nevertheless, we recruited people via Teams and it worked extremely well. We as a team have never met physically together since we've been formed, which I find astonishing. And we meet every single day, and I ensure we've a meeting at 2 o'clock every day as a team, and we get together. And what's important for me, and another positive from this entire experience, is that we don't just talk about work. And particularly on a Friday. So on a Friday, we have one Friday where we have an entirely social event. So we'll do, the usual quizzes or whatever it happens to be. What's your favourite movie? What's the 7th photograph on your phone, and why is it important to you? And then on the alternate Friday, we do like a kind of team building focus, where we'll look at the kind of personalities across the team, or what's coming up for the next year for us. So it is interesting. We've been able to pull this team together. I think it's a very high performing team at the moment, but we've never actually met each other face to face. None of us.
Yeah,
who would have thought that would have been a thing?
That's fascinating. Yeah, terrifying and fascinating. So we'll do one more question, and then if anyone has any questions, do feel free to drop questions into the chat, and we'll come to those in a second. If Melissa, if we come back to you, I don't want this to be the what have you learned from the last year question, but what has there been from the processes and the way that you've worked and the way that you've learned about yourselves as an organisation? What can you take forward that will work in future, that will mean you're when there is a semblance of normality, whether that's in 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, you will be able to pinpoint that was stress tested and the worst of stress you could possibly have?
I guess for me, and I'm sure it's something that every single person in this room will associate with, is how quickly you can pivot. I think lots of the campaigns that we ended up launching last year, we've been planning for 6 months, and then suddenly overnight, the strategies that you've pulled together, the ways of connecting with people, they don't make any sense anymore. And you need to kind of really go back to the grassroots, and you really need to look at the purpose of why you're speaking to people. So I guess for me, the thing that I want to take forward is that I guess how we view people in a sense. All of us get into this job because we're probably fascinated with people and we want to be able to understand how to communicate with them. But I guess it's the fact that that we don't need to necessarily spend 6 months of planning. Obviously, we'll still have campaigns that have that type of impact, but ultimately that you can communicate to people very, very quickly. You can pivot very quickly and you can change things very quickly. And sometimes things don't need to be perfect. I always use this quote because it always sticks with me. My partner is a pilot, so he could not be more different in terms of the industry that he works in. But he always says that one of the things they're taught, which is obviously very process orientated, everything has to be done meticulously. He always says perfect surgery kills patients, because basically if you followed everything by the rule book completely, you wouldn't actually be following the rules. And I think it's the first time that I've really been got to grips with that, I think, within our agency, because the fact is you can't have everything kind of lined up and planned and meticulously scheduled like you normally would, because what you have to go out live one day might not be appropriate the next. So I guess technically, I think if there's not one good thing, if there's many good things we can take from this, but if there's one thing I'm going to take forward, it's just be confident to be a little bit more reactive, and don't be afraid of it, I guess.
And the same question to you, Duncan. I mean, what has changed in the last year that will inform your next few?
Well, yeah, I think Melissa is spot on about the ability to pivot. I think I think that as a team, as an organisation, as probably just generally as an entire discipline, we're probably a lot more resilient than we probably gave ourselves credit for. And I think that that's something that definitely should be acknowledged. And I think that what I hope to see is this is an opportunity for communications and PR to become a lot more reflective and inclusive. So I think that I think the past year has shown that you do not need to value presenteeism or being in an office to contribute greatly. I think that frankly, and I have a partner who had chronic pain, and different workplaces that made life difficult for people to work in an office just because of that, because chronic pain. They couldn't possibly trust people working from home. Well, it turns out actually, we can, and we have, and we should continue to do. And I think that will allow comms to be a lot more inclusive and diverse, which I think is something we absolutely need, going to the next decade. And I think it's, from a personal point of view, in terms of how we work as an organisation, it's been a bit of an equaliser to a degree. That we often, we're a membership organisation, part of a group of a family of organisations, such as Universities UK and things like that. And often the case was that it would be you're calling into a call, and you are in a meeting room somewhere in London, and there's 6 of them round the table, and it's a bad connection, and all that sort of thing. Whereas now everyone's in the same boat. There's kind of that equality across the board as well, which makes life a lot easier. Obviously that won't necessarily return 100%, but I think that's what we've got to be conscious of, is how we can give everyone an opportunity to contribute going forward.
And Stuart, obviously, as things, whatever normal is in the coming months and years, return to that. What is there from this? I mean, you've mentioned some of the processes you put in place. Are those going to stay in place? Are you going to go back to the way things were? Are you eager to get back to the way things were, or what are you taking forward?
I'm afraid that's a yes and no answer. So yes, things will go back to normal. And as far as, and I've said it in the chat box there, a big motivator for my team and something that I need them to do is be out on our network. You cannot run a ferry service to the Western Isles and serve those communities sitting in an office in Gourock. So a big part of their role is to be out and about on a ferry, speaking to staff, speaking to our customers, speaking to communities. So that absolutely has to continue when they're able to do so. Where I think things are different, and this will absolutely impact on Gourock, we have around about 350 staff across 3 buildings in Gourock. During the pandemic, we have closed 2 of those buildings, and we will not be back. So we're now in the process of putting in place a hot desk system at our main office in Gourock with about 110 desks, and putting in place a software package where you have to book a desk. So nobody has a fixed desk, nobody has an office. If you want to go into the office from the future, once that's back open again, you will go online and book a desk, and there's no department, so you can sit wherever you want in the building. That's a sea change, if you'll pardon the pun, for us, and nobody would ever have thought that possible, and yet here we are. I'm already thinking about turning, what I thought would be a temporary home office into a permanent home office, and the team will get used to in the future, perhaps 2 days from home, 3 days in the network, and then once every fortnight meeting up in Gourock as an actual team face to face. So I think it has absolutely transformed the way in which we as a communications team will work in the future. There's no doubt about that. We will not go back to 5 or 6 of us sitting around the one table in an office in Gourock and then heading out from there. That has finished.
Yeah, I mean, so let's take some questions. If anyone has any questions, do feel free to throw them in. Melissa, we'll come back to you first. How do you feel that public relations is, or do you feel that public relations is more valued now as a strategic function because of how important communications have had to be over the last year?
No, I think they have. I think obviously as an agency, this time last year, one of our biggest fears was, are we going to lose all our budgets? Because I think traditionally, a lot of people sitting around a board table would be, we need to, remove outgoing spend. Where's the first department that you look? It tends to be the non-essentials. I'm definitely putting that in inverted commas, but what people view as non-essential in terms of kind of creative or advertising or marketing. But I think what we found really interesting is the actual new businesses that have come to us in the last year that perhaps hadn't invested in this type of, they hadn't necessarily made a huge investment in creative or advertising before. And I think what's really happened over the last year is that the role of brand has massively changed. I think as working in digital, I kind of often a lot of our results tend to be performance driven. You tend to get, oh, how many click-throughs did you get? What's the cost per click? What's this? What's that? But actually what I've noticed is a lot of people are more interested in things like brand awareness metrics. So things like how many people recall seeing something. And I think when all the shops shut down in a high street, or when basically we don't know where we're going to be in a week's time for holidays, for example, you don't know what's going to be happening on a week-to-week basis. You can't just rely on hard metrics of kind of success. And I think the thing that public relations has always done so well is built long-term awareness in people's minds. It's actually built brands, built knowledge within people. And to me, I think over the last year, it's become more important, and I've seen a massive step change in certain clients as well, viewing it as more important, because they know that they're not going to be able to get the same return on investment within a 2-week period. You don't know where you're going to be in a month's time. The one thing that you need to be certain in is people really understanding who you are and what you stand for, and no one does that better than the public relations industry.
And to you, Duncan, I mean, do you feel that the role of comms has been more important? Has it needed to be more nuanced? Has it needed to be? Has it taken on a different role slightly?
I think it has, and I think you can see that by just through the virtue of the pandemic itself. The mixed messages was received from government, and the interface of having two governments in Scotland has definitely been a factor, and the interesting, how people perceive things have gone well or not in Scotland in comparison to the rest of the UK, and a lot of that is around the framing of the messaging and the public relations advice, and I feel fortunate that I was already in an organisation that did value public relations and communications and public affairs. So I mean that's a bit fortunate, and I think that over the past year, the instances of where the sector has got it wrong has been when it has rushed its communications, and I don't think HE is unique to that, but where there hasn't been the intervention of comms professionals to say, actually, we potentially need to sit on this. There has been pressure to push things out as quick as possible, but actually I think there's great value in sometimes not going full pressure, top speed on getting your communications out, because you only get one chance a lot of the time with them, and if you get them wrong, then you're going to cause yourself a lot more damage in the future. And if you do see me in person, then that's okay. You've got an opportunity to ask me how we ended up banning students from the pub for a weekend and such like, but I'll not tell that tale here.
and same question to you, Stuart. I mean, you're dealing with, in the very best of times, you're dealing with a huge number of stakeholders. How have you felt that pulled more towards the centre of things as communications have had to be more nuanced?
Yeah, and one of our main challenges has been that we've got so many different audiences, and we've got so many different ways in which we can communicate with them. And part of the challenge we had prior to COVID was that you could find out information about whether your ferry was sailing from the app, from the website, from somebody standing at a port, and from the media. And more often than not, you would get 4 different versions of the truth. What we now do as a comms team is we meet with our commercial team and our customer service team every week to ensure that all of the lines are aligned. And that was something, again, that didn't happen before. So if you're reading something online in the media, on our website, through our app, it should all be exactly the same language, and we ensure that that happens now. So it really has put communication, as I said before, at the heart of what we're doing, and recognised it and elevated it above what it ever was. And that for me is a real positive, and I actually feel as if we're at the start of the journey here, because it's opened up lots of things like, we were sending out videos to staff, and then the feedback we got within a few weeks was, well, staff don't have anywhere to watch these videos. They don't have computers. They don't have, some of them get personal phones, but they don't want to use their data or whatever to do that. So we're looking at, enhanced Wi-Fi on board, etc. We're looking at screens on the vessels in the mess rooms so that staff can look at them. So it's actually opened up a whole new world that's going to allow us to improve the way we communicate going forward. And that was something that would have been a long, hard slog had we not had COVID.
Another question here. I mean, come straight back to you, Stuart. What's your experience of remaining visible in your organisation in the past year when we haven't been able to bump into people in corridors or at coffee machines? How have you recreated that artificially, the sort of accidental conversations? Kind of,
and we had we were due to go out exactly a year ago today and take our entire director team on the network, and we were going to go to Oban, and we were going to all head off in different vessels and speak to staff, and we had our script to ask the staff about, what was important to them and what we thought was coming up that they would find important. And then we were going to come back in Oban on Monday night and sit down and have a dinner and discuss all these wicked issues that were coming out from our staff. And then, of course, the whole thing was cancelled, and that was all about increasing visibility of senior people. It's taken us a while, if I'm honest, because we're dealing with the initial crisis, but nevertheless, we are now doing that virtually. So we've got systems on board where we can speak to people and they can join meetings and they can ask us questions and we can interact with them. So that's been, again, a real positive for us, that we're doing that. In terms of my own visibility, most people have adapted, as my team has, to a kind of daily team meeting, or at least a weekly team meeting. At least once a week I go and speak at another team's meeting through Microsoft Teams as it is that we use. And that's been, so I've got a new communication strategy was approved in January. I've now spoken to all the other teams about what that strategy is, what it involves, what it means to them, how we can help and support them, telling them who the members of the team are, inviting some members of the team along to speak to that strategy and go into their own specific specialisms. So we've tried to replace that face-to-face with the virtual attendance at meetings, and it has worked well. It will never be a substitute for going out and speaking to people face to face, in my personal opinion, but it has worked well.
And the same to you, Duncan. I mean, especially as a kind of industry body where you have a diverse and opinionated membership who have had their own pressures in many different ways. How do you recreate those little incidental moments?
It's tough. There's no doubt about it. Although, having said that, the move to Zoom or Microsoft Teams meetings has actually been more useful. We've had greater attendance at all our, we're a organisation for universities, so of course we have committees, and so we have to follow that. But our attendance from members has been higher now in the digital platform than it would be in person, largely because people aren't having to travel. They can engage a lot quicker, and they're not having to give up a full day potentially if they're coming from Inverness or Aberdeen to come to a meeting in Edinburgh. So I mean that's been really helpful, and I suppose it is just that constant checking in with members. We're fortunate we're a staff of 15 and we have 19 members. It's not too unruly as it could be in other places, but it's been very clear that we keep them in the loop. The government have definitely used us as an organisation to be the conduit for a lot of things, for a lot of policy discussions. That can be helpful and frustrating in equal measure. When assumptions have been tested, or we're being asked at the drop of the hat for information that we then have to collect in from 19 diverse organisations with about a 2-hour turnaround. That's fun. And so I think things like WhatsApp have been a huge boon. WhatsApp groups, that we have one now with all the principals. We have COVID leads. One that's there, so that when things are really urgent, we can get a turnaround on that. And it's the same with working with our communications offices, is just always letting them know what we are planning on saying and what they're noticing, because 19 members not set up in any way the same, and so it's not always a given that because we have sent from director to principal level that information will filter down to the people it needs to. So there's almost that can sometimes be overkill, but I would much rather do that and make sure that people definitely know than don't know and get caught unawares.
And Melissa, I mean, I guess from an agency point of view, it's and certainly from in my opinion, it's been a relatively smooth transition to speak to agency as a whole. But the challenge has actually been maybe speaking to people that you might bump into while you're having a cup of coffee, or in the kitchens or anything like that. How have you made sure that you're not becoming siloed and you're speaking to the people who think differently from you?
Well, we've had to really make a big conscious effort to be able to do this as well, because we merged earlier this year with a smaller London agency. So we went from a team of, say, I think it was about 25, 26 to a team of around 38, some of whom were now obviously based, we'd never met each other, but we're all expected to be a certain unit. So first of all, in terms of the diversity of thought, that's a little bit of an issue, but also it's how do you make sure that people are integrated? And the first thing we did was just 15-20 minute speed dates with everyone. So the idea was you're not meant to talk about work, you're just meant to say hello. The only thing is with those, as we all know, when you've got other meetings dropping in, they end up changing around, but we had to kind of say that we'd spoken to everyone, which worked. We've had WhatsApp groups. So again, we have team WhatsApp groups, we have kind of base WhatsApp groups, we have John Doe North, John Doe South, we have a group called Scrambled Legs, which is our fitness group, which goes through waves. You can see when someone, and I dread to admit how long it took us to come up with the name. Everyone was like, a typical agency name. We're like, no, it's not good enough, and then we ended up just being, let's just go with Scrambled Legs, it's fine. Otherwise, I think 6 months later, we still would have been, does it answer the brief, does it? But one thing that we did, which I think is probably our biggest step, was actually really mixing up our teams. So before, we kind of tended to have kind of 2 core units within the agency. We all knew each other really well, but instead what we've now done is none of our teams, or none of the client teams, people working on accounts, are purely kind of based in Glasgow or based down south. Actually, what's happened is a lot of people have been thrown together on clients that they've never worked on together. They've never actually worked together with each other. And I genuinely think the best way that a lot of the team members have become integrated is through work. I think very quickly, when you're working in a time-sensitive industry like we all are, you don't end up, you lose a lot of the niceties in a good way. You end up becoming very, very familiar with each other very, very quickly. And I think I guess as well, one benefit from all of this, which we'll all know, is it doesn't matter where you're based. I could be sitting in Spain right now, and I wish I was, though I don't think I'd want to deal with the fine when I came back. It doesn't matter whether you're, as I mentioned earlier, I'm Tom's neighbour, whether I live next door to Tom, or whether I'm 500 miles away. Actually, it's the same principle in terms of our relationships. So I think actually a lot of what Stuart was talking about earlier in terms of integrating new team members, that's actually made it in a weird way easier, because we're all separate anyway. It's not like there's a couple of us sitting in a room elsewhere. Instead, it's been all about us kind of, we're all in the same boat. We're all kind of separate. We're all just shoulders and no legs on a disparate screen. So I think generally, the situation itself has made it easier for us all to get integrated and for us all to adapt and for us all to kind of come together. and to remain visible with one another. And I think one thing actually, just in terms of remaining visible more broadly with our clients, obviously we're used to having, you know, weekly status calls, we always have done. But actually, I think one thing that we've become a lot more obsessed with is our own marketing and our own PR. We've never put out more press releases than we have in the last few weeks. And it's because actually, you can often kind of put your own marketing on your own agency to the side, but actually that's the way that people hear about you. That's the way that people know about what you're doing, and where you're not going to have coffees on, you know, what we normally would. You won't bump into each other, you won't have networking after this and have a glass of wine being able to chat about what you've done. Actually, sometimes you have to shout about yourselves a little bit more, and I think that's been kind of our core policy: have as many meetings as possible to get to know each other, and then shout about the good things that you do.
Very good. Very good. Any other questions? Do feel free to drop anything in. If not, I think thank you so much to all of our guests, and thank you very much for everyone for coming along today. It's been a really good chat. Thank you to our incredible panel, Melissa, Duncan and Stuart. Fascinating insight from you all. Hopefully see you all again soon, maybe even in person.